Coming up on The World Today. U.S. President Donald Trump denies he downplayed the seriousness of the coronavirus despite a recording where he did. The UAE, Bahrain, and Israel put pen to paper over an agreement to normalize relations. We'll look at reactions to what has been hailed as a historic moment. Plus, power knocked off more than 200,000 homes in Alabama as Hurricane Sally hits southern United States. A warm welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. Thanks for joining us. I'm Akaite Afia. We begin with a denial by the U.S. President Donald Trump that he did not downplay the coronavirus, which has infected more than 6.6 million people in the country and resulted in more than 195,000 deaths. President Trump was speaking at a televised town hall with voters where he says he instead upplayed the virus. The claim contradicts comments he made to journalist Bob Woodward earlier this year when he said he minimized the virus's severity to avoid panic. Meanwhile, the U.S. president says a vaccine against the deadly coronavirus could be 3 or 4 weeks away, despite caution by some U.S. health officials about that accelerated timeline.
Want to know the truth, the previous administration would have taken perhaps years to have a vaccine because of the FDA and all the approvals, and we're within weeks of getting it. You know, could be 3 weeks, 4 weeks, but we think we have it. Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, we have great companies, and they're very, very close.
Meanwhile, the Chinese city of Ruli in southwestern Yunnan province has begun free testing for COVID-19. The testing began on Sunday. According to authorities, 60,000 residents were tested in the last 24 hours. Now, this comes as the United Kingdom worries that if people who have a cough or fever request coronavirus tests, there will not be enough tests for every day for 5 months. Here's the global update.
Massive nucleic testing by China extends to Hong Kong. Nearly 600 Chinese health professionals have arrived in the administrative region to support its fight against the coronavirus and to support the massive testing program in particular. The testing program involves some 1.7 million residents in total.
89% of those who have tests.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the country's record on COVID-19 testing compares well with other European countries and that the government is working hard to turn them around even more quickly. Meanwhile, hundreds of people queuing to get a COVID-19 test in Southend-on-Sea in eastern England have been growing impatient over bottleneck in the country's coronavirus testing system. The government has promised to do whatever it takes to boost laboratory capacity that has left people across the land with no way to get a COVID-19 test. Authorities in Peru have reported that coronavirus cases are stabilizing in the Andean country, with some regions exhibiting a downward trend after months of lockdown. Peru has recorded nearly 740,000 cases of the coronavirus, the fifth highest caseload in the world, and 30,927 deaths as of Tuesday. It is tracked amongst the world's deadliest infertility rate per capita, with 94 deaths per 100,000 residents. And as a second wave of coronavirus sweeps across France and the number of seriously ill patients climbs higher, intensive care medics say the lessons learned from early in the pandemic are leading to changes in how they treat the sick. Intensive care unit Dr. Alexander Avenel says he and his colleagues are delaying mechanical ventilation, a procedure which involves running a tube down a person's windpipe, increasingly placing non-sedated patients on their fronts and reducing the doses used in corticotherapy. Young people, especially the young ethnic minorities, are more vulnerable to COVID-19, which is wreaking havoc in the United States, according to the latest tally by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The latest Morbidity and Mortality Weekly report, released by the CDC, young ethnic minorities are more vulnerable when facing the virus. Finally, in Spain, the Madrid region, one of the worst hit in the country, is to introduce targeted lockdowns and other restrictions on movement on Friday in areas with high COVID-19 cases. Madrid accounts for around 1/3 of active coronavirus cases in Spain, with a higher incidence in high-density and low-income neighborhoods, mainly in the south of the city.
One day after the historic deal between the UAE, Bahrain, and Israel was signed at the White House, Bahraini locals apparently have mixed feelings about the kingdom's normalization deal with Israel. The kingdom hopes for strong economic cooperation now that the agreement has been signed, as well as reciprocal trading between the two sides and free movement of tourism. Others have rejected the so-called peace deal, calling it an injustice to the Palestinian people who have resisted and persevered to gain their historical rights. Still, some call for peace, claiming that Islam does not forbid Muslims from making permanent peace with their enemies. The deals denounced by the Palestinians make them the third and fourth Arab states to take such steps towards normalizing relations since Israel signed peace treaties with Egypt in 1979 and Jordan in 1994. Just to recap on what happened at the White House, on Tuesday, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain signed agreements to normalize ties with Israel, becoming the first Arab states in a quarter of a century to break a long-standing taboo in a strategic realignment of Middle East countries against Iran. U.S. President Donald Trump hosted leaders and representatives of the governments of these countries at the White House, capping a dramatic month when first the UAE and then Bahrain agreed to reverse decades of ill will without a resolution of Israel's dispute with the Palestinians. In front of a crowd of several people on the White House lawn, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu signed accords with the Emirati Foreign Minister Sheikh Abdul bin Zayed Al Nahyan and Bahrain's Foreign Minister Abdul Latif Al Zayani. The back-to-back agreements mark an improbable diplomatic victory for the U.S. president. He has spent his presidency forecasting deals on such intractable problems as North Korea's nuclear program, only to find achievements elusive.
So this was a natural, and having you be signing and doing the agreement today. So in 72 years, they've done 2 agreements, and we've done 2, as you know, in a period of a month. But we have other things happening that are very good, equally as good, very important, worldwide, very, very important. But it's an honor to have you here, and say hello to your family and your brother and all of those people that we so respect. Thank you very much.
As we say in Arabic, shukran, Mr. President. We are humbled.
Buoyed by his achievements in the Middle East, President Trump now says he expects Saudi Arabia to be among 7 to 9 other Gulf countries to normalize relations with Israel.
Don't like Donald Trump too much.
General Kelly, I've been reluctant to defend you in Israel over the course of the past.
Because we're very different, and you can see that with the deal we made today. I'm not a big fan of General Mattis, as you know. I think he's a very overrated general, but regardless, I guess he's a nice guy. He just didn't do the job for me. He didn't do the ISIS job after we got rid of him. It worked out very well. We took over 100% of the caliphate. But I do things differently. If you listen to the 3 world leaders today, and these are highly respected leaders and countries, UAE is a tremendously respected warrior. I mean, they're warriors. They're a very strong, respected country. If you listen to what they said, nobody thought of the plan that I thought of. And it's going around the back door. I call it going around the smart door and coming in a different way. And we have many other countries going to be joining us, and they're going to be joining us soon. We'll have, I think 7 or 8 or 9. We're going to have a lot of other countries joining us, including the big ones. We already have the big one, but including the big ones. And this is not something that the people that you mentioned would be able to be doing. And it's not something that my critics thought was possible. And now they say, wow, that was a good idea. I will say it's gotten rave reviews, even from the New York Times and Tom Friedman and a lot of people that don't like Donald Trump too much. They've given it literally rave reviews. So this is one deal, but we have many others like this. Look, our country's been stagnant for many years. We did nothing but give our money away, give our wealth away, and give our jobs away. And now we stopped that. We stopped that 3.5 years ago.
Joining us now is Director General of the Bolitag Center for Diplomacy and Strategic Studies, Professorbola Akinterenwa. Professor Akinterenwa, thanks for joining us on the program today.
Thank you.
So, first of all, what are your thoughts on the way and the manner in which this deal has been brokered?
First is the issue of timing. I want to believe that it is specifically timed to coincide with the preparation for the November US presidential elections to make life easier for President Donald Trump. Secondly, it clearly shows that a concrete foundation is now being laid to put an ultimate end to the collective belief that the Arabs can easily push the Israelis to the seaside. This has been the belief that, look, Israel will never be allowed to exist as a sovereign state. Again, the agreement lays a good foundation for the establishment of diplomatic ties. The advantage of that one is that with a diplomatic mission, the issues, disagreements that are likely to arise, outstanding issues, questions, can now be monitored by the diplomatic missions. Another point is that since the end of the First World War, there is the international policy that the best way to manage opponents, enemies, is the policy of inclusion. So you do not do away with your enemies. You try to bring closer your enemies so that you can now understand the enemy and then see how you can, by so doing, manage hostility. And more importantly, I think that peacemaking is by installment. This agreement clearly shows that they are now going to bring an ultimate enduring peace by installment, taking it one by one, trying to bring some countries. You know, it started with Egypt, signed an agreement with the US in order to maintain, sustain, and make warmer relationship with the US. It started with Egypt long time ago, and that's the Camp David Agreement. But now we have Jordan as well coming in. We now have Bahrain also coming in. So it's one by one. And we only hope that even though it is more of protection of selfish interest as at now, ultimately we believe that they will be able to climb the ladder of peace in the long run.
Well, speaking of peace, President Trump has hailed it as a step to peace in the Middle East. And I suppose the happiest of the participants is Israel, which since its inception has never been recognized as a sovereign state. The Trump administration believes deals like these will eventually bring peace to the Middle East, but I sense you have a warning here.
Yes, I do. I do have warning. You see, it is not by word of mouth or by simply signing an agreement that will make peace. There are critical issues that have not been addressed and that no one is talking about. For instance, you will recall that the issue of occupied territories by the Israelis is still there. There is the issue of the membership of the PLO, the Palestinian Organization, as a member of the UN, which was frustrated by the coalition effort of the US and the Israelis, is still there. There is also the issue of the status of Jerusalem. The international community, the United Nations, believes that we must plan for a two-state, territory to coexist together, state of Israel and state of Palestine. But now that one is still hanging. There is also the issue of...
Sorry to interject here. We do have to go on break, but I want to thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Still ahead on the program. It's time to say goodbye as Japan's longest-serving Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, officially resigns. Stay with us. Hurricane Sally has made landfall in the southern United States, with flooding reported from Tallahassee, Florida, to Mobile Bay in Alabama. The storm is one of the several in the Atlantic Ocean, with officials running out of letters to name the hurricanes.
Sally made landfall on Alabama's west Gulf Coast this morning as a Category 2 hurricane after winds intensified overnight. Winds clocked at 105 miles per hour, able to cause extensive damage, according to the 5-step Saffir-Simpson scale. The hurricane also poses risk of catastrophic and life-threatening flooding along portions of the north-central Gulf Coast. As the day progressed, winds blew trees and sent debris flying. More than 430,000 homes and businesses were without power in Alabama and Florida. That's according to local utilities, with more outages expected. In downtown Mobile, strong winds shook windows while trees and power lines swayed. Officials across the south had called on residents of low-lying areas to shelter away from rain and winds. In Pensacola, a wind gust registered 81 miles per hour. Hurricane Sally comes weeks after Hurricane Laura killed at least 6 people in the state of Louisiana. Sally is the 18th named storm in the Atlantic this year and the 8th of tropical storm of hurricane strength to hit the United States. 2 other named storms have also recently formed in the Atlantic.
UN investigators are investigating the Venezuelan government over reports of crimes against humanity. Referring to its findings, the UN team says Venezuelan security services have been engaged in a pattern of systematic violence since 2014, aimed at suppressing political opposition and generally terrorizing the population. It says leader Nicolas Maduro and the ministers of Interior and Defense were not only aware of the crimes, but gave orders, coordinated operations, and supplied resources. It calls on Venezuela to hold those responsible to account and to prevent further violations from taking place. 4 of 6 migrants have been arrested over the fires that burned down the Moria migrant camp in the Greek island of Lesbos. The 6 were detained a day earlier by the police. More than 12,000 people were left without shelter, proper sanitation, or access to food and water after the fire last week. There were no casualties. Only some 1,000 people have entered the new temporary tent camp set up by authorities on Lesbos, and authorities continue to try to convince migrants to enter the facility. Resisting migrants want to leave Greece for other European countries. The former British colony of Barbados wants to become a republic. As such, they say they would like to remove Britain's Queen Elizabeth as its head of state. The Caribbean nation gained independence from Britain in 1966, but has maintained a formal link with the British monarchy, as have some other countries that were once a part of the British Empire. Barbados Governor General Sandra Mason, delivering a speech on behalf of the country's Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, says Barbados will take the next logical step towards full sovereignty and become a republic by the time it celebrates its 55th anniversary of independence, which comes up in November 2021. The 75th session of the UN General Assembly has been declared open by the new General Assembly President, Volkan Bozkır. In his opening remarks on Tuesday, Mr. Bozkır said he was honored to officially become the chairman of the UN General Assembly and expressed gratitude to the member states for their trust. Mr. Bozkır was sworn in earlier on Tuesday at the closing of the 74th session of the General Assembly. He was congratulated by Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
As we mark the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, it is clear that the world has high expectations of us as the main platform for multilateralism and cooperation on a rules-based international system. Your emphasis on streamlining the agenda of the General Assembly and balancing the three pillars of our work to achieve concrete results must help to meet those expectations.
And finally on the program, Japan's longest-serving Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, and his cabinet resigned, clearing the way for Yoshihide Suga to take over as his successor. Ahead of Suga's election, the country's new Prime Minister in Parliament. Abe, whose support was critical in ensuring Suga's victory in the party election this week, entered the Prime Minister's office on the last day of his tenure and thanks the people of Japan, vowing to support the incoming government as a regular member of Parliament. Abe said he was proud to have taken on various challenges with the Japanese people and that medicine is taking for his chronic illness, working on it, and he is recovering. Well, that is all for the world today. Thank you so much for staying with us. I'm Akaite Afia. Have a great evening and stay safe.